I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to be talking about the Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, specifically the preface and the last chapter. Sisyphus's tale is one of repetitive and eternal suffering. Yet Albert Camus, at the end of his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, writes, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." Why? The Myth of Sisyphus is one of two major philosophical essays by Albert Camus. Camus was not a professional philosopher. He did not have a PhD in philosophy, though he did study philosophy for his undergraduate degree at the University of Algiers, which gives hope to us all. He is best known as a novelist and playwright, where in his existentialist works he elaborates his philosophical ideas on the absurd and revolt through fiction, though he denies he is an existentialist writer. We see this when he critiques some of the existentialist writing and ideas in the other chapters of The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus' life was dramatic. Born in 1913 in Algiers to a poor family, his father was a military veteran and wine shipping clerk who was called up for military service when World War I broke out. He died in the war. His mother was a housekeeper and part-time factory worker in an ammunitions factory. Besides being a novelist, Camus had worked at odd jobs as a journalist, a newspaper editor, and was active in the theatre as playwright and director. He became acclaimed as a writer in the 1940s, which was the time when he wrote The Myth of Sisyphus. He worked for the clandestine newspaper Combat, which was the journalistic arm of the French resistance, during the war years and continued after the liberation of France. The point of outlining his biography is to say that his life and the era in which he lived, one characterized by war, influenced his thoughts profoundly. This might seem to be an obvious idea, though an expectation of philosophy is that it is a search for universal truth. Camus' philosophy is a product of his times, even though what he had written continues to be valid and insightful in our peaceful times. In 1960, he died in a car accident aged 46. 3 years before his death, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature for illuminating the problems of the human conscience. As an introduction to the book, I will cover the preface and the final chapter. You need not worry that this will be a spoiler. In fact, one way to read philosophy texts and papers is to read the introduction and conclusion first, to figure out if it is something you are even interested in. Philosophy texts are not narratives, and it can help to have a broad idea of what it is about before embarking on a proper reading. Anyway, in this case, Camus already tells the reader what the book is trying to do right from the start. It attempts to resolve the problem of suicide without the aid of eternal values. The fundamental subject of the Myth of Sisyphus is this: it is legitimate and necessary to wonder whether life has a meaning. Therefore, it is legitimate to meet the problem of suicide face to face. He gives the answer of his investigation in the next line, which is a resounding no. Even if one does not believe in God, suicide is not legitimate. Although the Myth of Sisyphus poses mortal problems, it sums itself up for me as a lucid invitation to live and to create in the very midst of the desert, he writes. The Myth of Sisyphus is a series of essays where Camus investigates various aspects to living in this absurd world. It has 4 main chapters, firstly on an absurd reasoning, then the absurd man, absurd creation, with the last chapter named the same as the title of the book. As he relates in the preface, the Myth of Sisyphus is a personal work for him. It is a self-reflection which he tries to approach in a cold and impassioned manner why he should live and create. By now you may be wondering, what does Camus mean by absurd? Why suicide? And who is Sisyphus? Camus writes, "The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need for happiness and reason, and the unreasonable silence of the world. The absurd is the state of the human condition. As conscious beings, we have a need to understand, to find order and meaning in our lives. However, we are confronted with a meaningless and indifferent universe, which leads us to wonder, what then is the point of living, and why shouldn't we commit suicide?" That is the central question of the book. Camus writes, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. For him, all the rest of philosophy, for instance metaphysics, are games. Who is Sisyphus? Sisyphus is a character from Homer's epic, the Iliad, who cheated death. As his punishment, he was condemned by the gods to roll a rock up a mountain only to see it fall back down when it reaches the top, over and over again, forever. Could one imagine a more dreadful punishment than futile and hopeless labor, accomplishing nothing? According to Camus, Homer presents Sisyphus as the wisest and most prudent of mortals, though other accounts portray him as a trickster. Camus regales us with different accounts. Sisyphus stole the secrets of the gods. Jupiter, god of the sky and thunder, the chief Roman god, kidnapped the daughter of Sisyphus. Sisyphus witnessed it, and when Sisyphus complained to him about it, offered to spill the beans if Sisyphus would give water to the citadel of Corinth, the city where Sisyphus was king. In another account by Homer, Sisyphus had captured Death, putting him in chains. Pluto, god of the underworld, could not stand how his realm was now deserted and sent the god of war to liberate Death. In the most famous account of Sisyphus' story, Sisyphus was near to death and wanted to test his wife's love while tricking Death. He told her that if she loved him, to simply cast his unburied body into a public square. She did that, and when Sisyphus awoke in the underworld, he was annoyed by such an obedience so contrary to human love. He asked Pluto to allow him to return to Earth to scold his wife, but upon his return, he realized his love for life in the world of the living and could not bear to return to the underworld of darkness. Finally, the gods decreed that he was to be taken back. Mercury, the god who guides souls to the underworld, was dispatched to capture Sisyphus, bringing him back to the underworld where he would carry out his punishment with the rock. Sisyphus is the absurd hero, writes Camus. We can see why his life seems absurd, but why heroic? Camus explains that it is heroic because of his scorn of the gods, his hatred of death, and his passion for life. In case one did not already understand why Sisyphus' punishment is a torment, Camus depicts it graphically. One sees the whole effort of a body straining to raise the huge stone, to roll it and push it up a slope 100 times over. One sees the face screwed up, the cheek tight against the stone, the shoulder bracing the clay-covered moss, the foot wedging it, the fresh start with arms outstretched, the wholly human security of two earth-clotted hands. At the very end of his long effort, measured by skyless space and time without depth, the purpose is achieved. Then Sisyphus watches the stone rush down in a few moments towards that lower world, whence he will have to push it up again towards the summit. He goes back down to the plain. Can you feel the muscles straining, the exertion racking Sisyphus' body, and his mental torment? The essence of his suffering is repetition. Those hearing the story of Sisyphus is often focused on the agony of his push uphill and the defeat of the rolling stone back down. However, for Camus, what he finds most interesting in the story is Sisyphus' trudge back downhill. Just like the certainty of his struggle uphill, there is also the certainty of the reprieve Sisyphus will have on his walk going back down. As an aside, this is precisely the brilliance of thinkers like Camus and Søren Kierkegaard. We may be familiar with the story of Sisyphus, and in the case of Kierkegaard, of the biblical tale of Abraham's thwarted sacrifice of Isaac. But it takes a mind like theirs to think about the untold bits, to imagine what might be going through the minds of the protagonists during the latent periods. Back to Sisyphus, Camus writes, that hour is like a breathing space which returns as surely as his suffering. That is the hour of consciousness. Consciousness of what? Can you imagine what Sisyphus might be thinking in that walk downhill? That awareness of what is awaiting him, of the hopeless endlessness of the task, of his impotent frustration and anger, perhaps some regret for his former actions that brought this everlasting punishment on him. However, there is no room for repentance. He cannot talk his way out of this one. Even if he was deeply sorry, the gods were never going to let him off the hook. We can of course only speculate what his ponderings might be in that hour. For Camus, in the descent towards the base, Sisyphus was superior to his fate. He is stronger than his rock. Why does Camus think of it like a victory instead of a crushing and pitiful defeat? Precisely what makes the story of Sisyphus a tragedy is that its hero is conscious. Sisyphus is fully aware of his situation, eminently conscious of how he is doomed to failure. He is without hope. There is no hope, no possibility of success to sustain him. What makes the nature of his punishment so dreadful is its endless repetition. But what makes this repetition dreadful is its hopelessness. What makes hopelessness visceral is his awareness of its hopelessness. At this point in the chapter, Camus reveals his hand of what he is really writing about. He is not regaling us with a tale of Sisyphus out of a nostalgia for Greek mythology. The real topic of his essay is us. He writes, "The workman of today works every day in his life at the same task, and this fate is no less absurd. But it is tragic only at the rare moments when it becomes conscious. Sisyphus is us. If we mindlessly do our work and not think too much about the repetitive nature of our lives, a cycle of labor eats sleep, that is the pattern of our days as long as we live, we generally get by. If, however, we mull over the seeming futility and meaninglessness of this cycle, without even the consolation that God has a purpose for us for those who do not believe in God, we might fall prey to existential despair. This despair may lead to suicide, since what is the point of even continuing on if one has no hope nor meaning? This is the question Camus wants and needs to answer. How does Camus provide a way out for Sisyphus and for us? The lucidity that was to constitute Sisyphus' torture at the same time crowns his victory. There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn, writes Camus. Lucidity is clear thinking. Sisyphus is lucid. He is very clear on what is happening to him. He knows just how acute and hopeless his situation is. He has no illusions about it. Scorn is a contempt. Sisyphus is scornful of the gods and their punishment. The only way they can win, the only way they can really crush Sisyphus, is if he gives in, if he admits defeat, if he allows the punishment to hurt and destroy him. If the descent is thus sometimes performed in sorrow, it can also take place in joy, explains Camus. Camus imagines that when the punishment first began, say during the first 50 cycles, Sisyphus was sad, mourning his loss, with his memories still fresh from the pleasure he had while alive on earth, when he still longed for happiness. It is at these points that the gods won. This is the rock's victory. This is the rock itself. The rock is the rock, but also stands for Sisyphus' existential despair. Camus writes, "But crushing truths perish from being acknowledged." As far as I understand the mood of his rhetoric, it is not that the truth vanishes, but its crushing force. Its destructive force dissipates once we confront the truth head-on, once we lucidly, clearly see things as they are. When Sisyphus finally comes to terms with his situation, fully acknowledging that what awaits him is just more of the same torment, he can then decide how he is going to respond to it. It is when he holds out some hope that this burden can be taken from him that he will be unable to truly cope with it. However, it does not mean that the suffering vanishes. The tragedy in fact begins with a proper understanding of what is to come. Here, Camus introduces another Greek tragedy, Oedipus Rex. When Oedipus was born, his father Laius, the king of Thebes, received a prophecy from the oracle at Delphi that he was doomed to perish by the hand of his own son. Hence he ordered his wife Jocasta to kill baby Oedipus. He commanded a servant to expose the child in the mountains, but the servant, unable to do it, gave him to a shepherd. Oedipus finally ended up at the house of Polybus, the king of Corinth, who adopted him as his marriage was childless. When Oedipus grew up, he visited that same oracle, who told him that he would kill his father and marry his mother. To avoid such a fate, Oedipus did not return to Corinth. He was en route to Thebes when he encountered Laius. Their carriage blocked each other's passage, and they quarrelled over who should go first, leading to Oedipus killing Laius. When he arrived at Thebes, the city was plagued by the Sphinx, who posed riddles to those passing by, killing those who were unable to solve them. The riddle was, what walks on 4 feet in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 at night? Oedipus answered correctly that it was man, who as an infant crawled on all fours, as an adult walked on 2 feet, and as an old man with a walking stick. The Sphinx went mad and killed herself. Oedipus's reward was marriage to the widowed queen of Thebes, Jocasta, who was his biological mother, though this was unknown to Oedipus. They had 4 children. A plague struck Thebes, and Oedipus sent his uncle to the oracle at Delphi to figure out what to do to end the plague. The oracle said that the plague was because the murderer of King Laius had not been brought to justice. Oedipus decided that when found, the murderer would be exiled. Oedipus sought out a blind prophet to find the murderer, but he warned Oedipus not to seek Laius's killer. They argued, and the prophet let slip that Oedipus was the killer. Oedipus became angry, and Jocasta tried to calm him down by telling him about the prophecy of her firstborn son killing Laius, and how that was not possible since that son was exposed to death. Oedipus started to get nervous, but was relieved when a messenger arrived from Corinth announcing the death of King Polybus. He thought the prophecy was hence wrong, since he did not kill Polybus, whom he thought was his birth father. He, however, decided not to attend the funeral, as his mother was still alive. To ease the tension, the messenger revealed that Oedipus was in fact adopted. Jocasta then realized the true identity of Oedipus and begged him to stop his investigation into the murder of Laius. Oedipus, however, persevered and verified the messenger's account from the shepherd who was to have him killed as a baby. He now knew the truth, that he had fulfilled the prophecy of killing his father and marrying his mother. He went in search of Jocasta, finding her dead from hanging herself. He blinded himself using a pin from a brooch on her gown. He exiled himself with his daughter Antigone as his guide, and they wandered through the country. Camus judges that the moment Oedipus knew the truth was when his tragedy began. While he was unaware, he was still blissful in his innocence, but his realization was when his suffering commenced. Camus, drawing from Sophocles' account of Oedipus, writes that Oedipus realizes that the only bond linking him to the world is the cool hand of a girl, his daughter Antigone. Then a tremendous remark rings out. Despite so many ordeals, my advanced stage and the nobility of my soul makes me conclude that all is well. Camus calls this the absurd victory. Why is this, like Sisyphus' tale, a victory? Why is it that Oedipus concludes that all is well, and Camus concludes that Sisyphus is happy? Camus thinks that one discovers that the world is absurd only when they try to understand their happiness. Happiness and the absurd are 2 sons of the same earth. They are inseparable. The feeling of the absurd springs from happiness, he writes. He thinks that for Oedipus, as for Sisyphus, all is well because all is not, has not been exhausted. All possibilities have not been exhausted. Not everything has been foretold. Our destinies have not been predetermined and decided by fate or God. While Camus did not believe in God, he did not consider himself assured enough to declare that God does not exist and was not militantly opposed to religious beliefs and practices. Nonetheless, he thinks that fate is a human matter, that we control our destinies. All Sisyphus' silent joy is contained therein. His fate belongs to him. His rock is his sting, writes Camus. How I understand this is that whether Sisyphus chooses to be sorrowful or happy, it is his choice. He can make the rock his tormentor, or he can make it, in today's parlance, his bitch. While it is debatable whether Camus is a Stoic, in this bit the attitude that he thinks Sisyphus can adopt is stoical. What the Stoics believe is that while there are many things that they cannot control, what they can control is their response. Applying this to Sisyphus, while he has no say over his punishment, he can certainly decide how he is going to respond to it, and Camus interprets that Sisyphus responds with scorn, as earlier noted. Oedipus cannot stop the coming to pass of the prophecy of the oracle, but he can adopt a mature and dignified approach, realizing that despite all his sufferings, he still had his daughter to help him, that he is still standing, referencing the Elton John song, and hence all is well. Camus' absurd man is a person who recognizes that he lives in an absurd world and faces this truth head-on, without trying to make sense of it by taking comfort through thinking that there is a God who will make everything turn out right. In silencing these false idols, it allows the absurd man to hear a myriad of wandering little voices of the earth, unconscious secret calls, invitations from all the faces. Camus does not elaborate what these are in the essay, but my interpretation is this. Without being able to depend on God or the illusion of God, the absurd man would now be able to properly confer with his fellow men who, like him, wonder about the human condition. His innate intuition may also be a source of guidance. There is no sun without shadow, and it is essential to know the night, writes Camus. Towards the end of the essay, Camus gets increasingly poetic but also enigmatic. I feel that what he is saying here is that there are multiple aspects to things, of which we cannot enjoy the good without accepting the contrary. If we do not want shadow, then we also cannot have the light. The shadow is perhaps an unwelcomed side effect, but it is an essential part of the deal, of the plenitude of the sun. Hence we need to also know the darker side of life, instead of denying it or becoming delusional, trusting in illusions to overcome it. The absurd man accepts it all and rejects the idea of a predetermined fate, or even if there is indeed such a thing as fate. It is inevitable and hence something to be despised and not yielded to, making the absurd man the master of his days. Camus envisions a breakthrough for Sisyphus when in a subtle moment he reflects over all that has come to pass and realizes that he still has the volition to control his emotional response to the situation. The rock is still rolling. Not everything is played out yet. All is not exhausted. As for Oedipus, who is now blinded, he is still alive and on the go. From the story of Sisyphus, Camus believes that we can learn the higher fidelity, the higher truth, which is a truth that negates the gods and raises rocks. By scorning the gods, by no longer allowing himself to be slave to such a master, or in our case, slave to the illusion of gods, it does not mean that the universe has become a sterile nor futile place. There remains the concrete reality for us to embrace. For Sisyphus, each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. In existentialist terms, one can still find meaning, beauty and happiness despite living in an absurd world. The struggle itself towards the height is enough to fill a man's heart, writes Camus. He does not write that reaching the heights is what will fulfill us. Instead, he talks about how our struggle is enough to satisfy us, to know that we have kept on trying, that we have done our best, even if we eventually fail. The fact is, there is no way to know whether we would succeed or fail in advance of beginning our struggles. If we do not even begin, there is no chance at all of succeeding, which is why the struggle and the courage to continue the struggle is necessary to even provide a chance of success. Though facing things squarely in the spirit of the myth of Sisyphus, we must be cognizant of how we might, regardless, still fail. That, however, should not stop us, since if it does, we have already failed. With this struggle towards the height remaining for Sisyphus, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. On those words, Camus concludes the book. He resolves the paradox. The man condemned to suffer interminably can still be happy. Why must one imagine Sisyphus happy? Returning to the beginning of the chapter, Camus points out that Homer presents Sisyphus as the wisest and most prudent of mortals, though other accounts portray him as a highwayman, a trickster. He then writes, I see no contradiction in this, without explaining any further. If we consider that Sisyphus, in his action of tricking the gods, was simply pursuing his bliss, and in that way acting wisely and prudently, then the two aspects are not contradictory. But to return to the last sentence on us having to imagine Sisyphus happy, given the circumstances, Sisyphus making the choice to adopt a happy attitude may indeed be wise and prudent. It may seem delusional, but if the rock is your lot, is it not wise to make the best of things? And in that way, the gods do not win. Instead, Sisyphus wins. To close off this essay on the preface and the last chapter of Camus' book, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder. It comes from the very beginning, even preceding the preface, and it is the epigraph of the myth of Sisyphus. Camus quotes Pindar, an ancient Greek lyric poet. "O my soul, do not aspire to immortal life, but exhaust the limits of the possible." Appendix 1. Using fiction philosophically. Sisyphus is a story shot through with metaphors, beginning with Sisyphus as the embodiment of Camus' absurd man. His rock is the burden of the repetitive nature of work, and more generally of the burden of our existence. Climbing up the mountain is our regular striving to achieve what we aim to achieve. The top of the mountain resembles achieving what we intended. The rock falling back down can be seen as failure, but even if we do achieve our aims, the rock still rolls back down since the struggle of life continues. In the maintenance of our achievements, since achievement does not mark an end, but simply a point which needs to be continually maintained and rebuilt, in the form of other aims or new aims, or the void still remaining within us even if we have succeeded in some way. The trudge downhill is not a march of defeat, but a time to reflect, to rest, to regroup. The story could have taken on other shapes. Instead of a mountain with a fixed height, it could have been an ever-growing mountain or a series of mountains, so that even as we reach one peak, new one awaits us. Our feet could have been shackled to the rock, which drags us along as it tumbles back down, giving us nary a moment of reprieve, while tearing us to pieces each time, resembling our increasing injuries from the tumbles of life, our increasing weakness as we bleed, our increasing desperation made worse by our increasing inability. We have, however, to remember that Camus is using the story of Sisyphus not as gospel he is interpreting to get at an imminent truth, but as a parable to help us better understand our human condition. He emphasizes some aspects of the story while disregarding others to make his philosophical points. For example, there are gods in the story, and yet Camus believes that the appeal to supernatural deities is an unjustifiable consolation, a cop-out. The myth does not fit with all his purposes, since what do the gods metaphorically represent? Using fiction philosophically has its limits. Not everything fits. Camus uses what in the story of Sisyphus suits his purpose, and relegates to the background or ignores the rest. The story of Sisyphus is a vehicle for him to elucidate his philosophy, and while it might have inspired or triggered some philosophical thoughts in Camus, he is not explaining the myth, but using it to make his philosophy more visceral to his readers. Appendix 2. The nature of tragedy. What does the tragedy, especially of the ancient Greek variety, entail? According to Peter Backermans, there are 4 kinds of suffering which can be understood through a 4x4 grid, along the axis of whether one is conscious of the outcome and whether one is responsible for it. The nature of tragedy is that the protagonist is not conscious that he did wrong and is also not responsible for the bad outcomes, though this seemingly differs from Camus' perception of tragedy when he writes, "But from the moment he, Oedipus, knows, his tragedy begins." However, we can reconcile the 2 different understandings by simply considering who is perceiving the tragedy. For the audience of the tragic play, they already early on understood that Oedipus is in for a bad surprise. He, however, is blissfully unaware until later on. He was not responsible in the sense that if he knew he was murdering his biological father, he would have refrained. Likewise, if only he knew, he would not have married his biological mother. It would seem almost as if events, quite absurd, conspired to lead him to the tragic ending. With this framework, Camus may perhaps rephrase it as Oedipus's suffering and not tragedy commencing once he realized the truth. However, Camus is taking Oedipus's point of view, where indeed the sense of tragedy for Oedipus commenced once he realized the truth. In the case of Sisyphus, however, this framework does not fit so well, since Sisyphus is arguably conscious that he is defying the gods and acts as he desires, making him responsible, at least from the reader's point of view. How we can understand that Sisyphus is nonetheless a tragic character in accordance to this framework is to adopt the point of view of Sisyphus, as Camus seemingly did. Sisyphus may feel that he is doing the right thing in cheating death, making him not conscious of doing wrong in the eyes of the gods. He may also feel that his punishment is incommensurate with his deeds, making him feel not responsible at least to such an extent, which leads to the sense of tragedy in his story. Appendix 3. Just some comments on the text. Camus writes beautifully, so he is a pleasure to read. The chapter I just covered is brief and particularly easy to encounter, though its profundity does warrant some pondering on its shades of meaning. The rest of the chapters are also well written, though not quite so easygoing. Nonetheless, an attentive reader will be able to follow Camus' line of argumentation. It just requires patient reading. I would rate the entire text as easy for a reader used to philosophy and medium for one not so used to philosophical argumentation. Certainly the Myth of Sisyphus is worth reading. It is highly recommended for you to encounter it on your own. In fact, I like it so much that I'm considering if I should make a series of videos for each chapter and even sub-chapter, so as to study the book and reflect on it. Let me know what you think about that. Thank you for tuning in, and for now at least, the script will be exclusively available on my Patreon page. If you wish to support the Philosophical Bachelor, you can do so at worldwideweb.patreon.com/philosophicalbachelor. Thank you.